Good morning, everyone. It's good to see you all. Just a normal course of life that each one of us faces challenges and various challenges in life, right? Some of them are mighty and strong. Some of them are relatively weak. Some are brief in duration. Some seem to last forever. And these challenges have different effects on us, in part because we are all different, and in part because in any given moment we respond differently to challenges, even the same type of challenge. Sometimes we run away from them. Sometimes we have the courage to confront them head on. Sometimes we suit up and put our armor on and make preparations to go into battle. And other times we're so caught off guard that all we can do is cry out for help. Our faith also is shifted from time to time by the same, right? There are times when the challenges are so great and we recognize that our backs are against the wall and there's nothing left to do but pray. There are other times when our trust wanes and it seems hard to pray. Now, I don't know about you, but I like to keep my options open, so I am an all of the above kind of person there, and we'll run the gamut between all of those different things depending on what's going on. Sometimes I end up in two places at once, where my faith seems strong, but so does my doubt or my confusion, and it all seems bundled together and held together with these ribbons of what I once knew as trust. The disciples, too, knew this experience. It's not just a modern thing. They are, in this section that we're reading through right now, learning more and more about these types of experiences. It kind of goes like this for them. They are, as one commentator puts it, like kids learning how to ride a bike and the training wheels are still on. They had just, right before they got into this boat, experienced Jesus performing signs and wonders. You've probably heard before the story of Jesus feeding 5,000 or more with just 5 loaves and 2 fish, right? After that, he dismisses the crowd and he sends them across the Sea of Galilee, and then he goes up the mountain to pray. That's the preceding moment just before our passage picks up today. They are learning day by day that Jesus is capable of signs and wonders like that, and that not only is he capable, that he wants them to participate in the signs and wonders, right? It's not just something they observe, but he invites them to be a part of it. But like kids who are learning how to ride a bike, sometimes they are also falling off and getting scraped up knees and skinned elbows. This is one of those scenes. Skillful parents who helped kids ride bikes at some point will know that there are some really bad ways of going about it when your kid falls off a bike. One of those is to just make fun of them for being terrible bike riders. That does not help anything at all, right? The other is to remove all risk from their life altogether. They just can't be trusted anymore, and so wrap them in a bubble or some bubble wrap if you don't have a bigger bubble. Neither one of those works in terms of helping the kid develop. So skillful parents, myself not included necessarily, will seek instead to encourage and to coach. And I want to say those words because they are so helpful in framing what Jesus is doing with at least Peter, if not the other disciples, in this scene. The training wheels are on. They won't always be on. Jesus wants to encourage and to coach. Now, some more detail that it's worth taking a look at here. They are on the Sea of Galilee, and if you've not been to the Sea of Galilee before, it might be helpful for me to paint a little bit of a picture. This is not a sea at all. This is a lake, and not even a real big lake. You can see across it from any place on the shore all the way to the other side. Smaller than Lake Lanier. How about that? But it is susceptible, I guess, to some really violent weather patterns. You might expect that of a very large body of water. You would not expect that of such a small lake, but there's something going on for it geographically speaking. It sits as one of the lowest lakes in the world. Hundreds of feet, about 700 feet below sea level on average, is a part of this Rift Valley. Those of you who are into geology, come on with me. No, nobody? Rift Valleys? All right, well, bear with me for a second. So it's 700 feet below sea level in a Rift Valley. If you go up the sides of it, you get back to sea level, but the land just keeps on going. There are highlands around it, some plateaus. I promise I'm not going to get into the geology there. It's basaltic plateaus. That's amazing. There are plateaus, and then there are mountains that go, really thousands and thousands of feet up. Now, what happens is from time to time, cooler air will move over these highlands at 4,000 feet, something like that, and then come into this Rift Valley and start coming down. Now, some of y'all remember your sort of younger school years. Cold air goes down, hot air goes up. When cold air is rushing down the sides of these steep hills into the valley, it's displacing the warm air that's hovering above this lake at 700 feet below sea level. Weather happens, and sometimes it's quite violent altogether. The disciples who were in that boat, many of them had grown up around that lake. They knew these weather patterns well. Peter is one of those who grew up fishing on that lake. He knows the difference between a little storm and the kind of stuff that can happen every now and then when the gale force winds start raging. When the night had started, there was probably little risk. The training wheels were still on. Peter and the disciples got in. There was a stiff headwind. They didn't make a lot of progress. They were in for a tough night. They were going to face some waves. They were going to have to work hard. Their muscles and their brains were going to be tired. But they were going to make it just fine. This was not a struggle for life. Things might have even been better around the fourth watch, 3 o'clock in the morning or so, and that's when suddenly they saw a ghost. Understandable that they were terrified. Maybe for the first time that night, they were truly scared as this apparition floats across the water toward them. Jesus, though, announces his identity. He did it in a peculiar way. He seemed to at least allude to, if not outright associate with, the voice that spoke out of the burning bush to Moses. Remember that story? And he says, "Take heart. Do not be afraid." A good translation here would say, "Do not be afraid, I am." Or at the very least would put that in the footnotes somewhere. Some of the disciples got it. They knew what he was trying to say or what he was alluding to. Peter's probably one of those. So enthusiastic as he often is, he says, "Hey, call me out on the water. I'm going to come with you." And you know what ensues from there. But what happens next is a matter of translation that has puzzled not only biblical interpreters, but also preachers and artists and the like for centuries. What typically we hold on to is that Peter, because he is afraid or because he doubts, causes some kind of cause-effect thing to be triggered, some mechanism by which he begins to sink, and he's in trouble. And then usually what we do is we go a step farther and say, and therefore Jesus made fun of him for being Peter. That's usually how that goes. Preachers often make fun of him as well. I will not. I identify with him way too much for that. I don't think that Peter suddenly doubted that he was participating in a miracle of Jesus. I think he recognized that perfectly well. I don't think he forgot and then got to be in a place where he was afraid. I don't think that he doubted for 1 second what Jesus was capable, and therefore fear rose within him. Some interpreters I have seen think that this was somehow like Peter losing confidence in himself, and those people should probably read the Bible a little bit more. This did not have much to do with that at all. If we look closely at the text, we see not the cause-effect mechanism, but we see why he's afraid. Because he should have been afraid, right? He's facing a challenge that he knows. Here comes not just the same wind we've been facing all night, but now the text refers to it as a mighty wind, a strong wind. He's seen these before. He might be afraid for himself and for Jesus. This is bad news. Sore and exhausted and tired, he nor the disciples in the boat have any capacity to deal with this wind that is coming down the hillside. There's no indication in the text. I feel like I've said this a couple times. I'm going to say it one more time just in case you missed it. There's no indication in the text that because Peter is afraid, he begins to sink. He was afraid, and he began sinking. Those are totally separate, or at least might be separate in the text. He's sinking now. And so what's he going to do about this? Well, it's fear that, while it might not cause him to sink, does cause him to cry out. And not to cry out back to the guys in the boat, please save me, but to turn to Jesus and ask for salvation. He knew his back was against the proverbial wall. He recognized his complete and total dependence on Jesus to make it out alive. And Jesus is there. Reaches down to grab him and hold him. In the old ancient iconography for this sort of thing, you typically will see this, that Peter's hand is up out of the water and Jesus has him by the wrist. Maybe you've seen that before. There are a couple of different types of icons that show you that sort of thing. As if to say, to demonstrate, to symbolize that Peter has no power to even hold on to Jesus, but that salvation is being offered to him as a gift. He can't add to it at all. It's a remarkable theological statement. And then Jesus speaks. His tone is not recorded. But remember that parents, when helping children ride bikes, do it best when they're encouraging and coaching. He calls him by what appears to be a nickname. We often hear this in our interpretation as Jesus mocking Peter. You have little faith. What's wrong with you? In Greek, it's just one word. You have little faith. Hyphenate it if you need to. It's just one word. A nickname, perhaps. Hardly insulting, especially when held in light of what Jesus says you can do with just a little bit of faith. The same Jesus who says that you could move mountains with just a little bit of faith isn't going to start insulting Peter because he was struggling and his mind and soul were in two places at once. Not going to make fun of him for having a response to the challenge in his life that isn't that much different than the responses that we make to any of the challenges in our life. That's not his aim. Encouragement and coaching might be. I tend to hear instead Jesus say, you have little faith, why did you doubt? The calm, reassuring set of words, maybe given with a little smirk on his face. But I hardly think that Peter was smiling back. And just for the record, the word doubt doesn't appear in that sentence when Jesus responds to him. And I know this is like the third time that I have used this kind of trick in a sermon where, trust me, the word behind the word here is something different. But I want you to hear what a possible better translation might be. My friend of little faith, why did you hesitate? Why did you waver? Can you believe that the translators gave up on a pun like, why did you waver in the midst of a storm on the Sea of Galilee? Come on, people. Why did you hesitate? Why are you holding yourself in two places at once? That's the most literal version of that. One foot still on top of the water, the other one already sinking to the bottom, and you hesitated. For me, that changes everything about how I hear this. Instead of saying, Peter, Your spirit is broken. I hear encouragement. Peter, next time, call on me a little faster. Why did you wait? Why did you waver? Why did you hesitate? I'm right here and I'm ready to hold you anytime. Peter's caught in two worlds, one filled with fear and self-preservation and another fully trusting in Jesus, and Jesus isn't necessarily addressing any of that as he offers his hand and his promise of salvation. Jesus just wants to help and doesn't want Peter to hesitate in asking. The question isn't when Peter calls. It's not how Peter calls or whether he did it the right way. The question really is, on whom does he call? And is the character of Jesus such that he will be lifted up no matter what and encouraged? Yeah, I think so. As it is for us. We read from Romans today. This is a whole other sermon that I won't give, I promise. But we read from Romans today another passage that I think gets misinterpreted all the time. That if you confess with your lips and believe in your heart that Jesus is Lord, you will be saved. How many of you have heard that before from a well-meaning church that is trying to scare you to death so that you will say the right words and believe the right things, sign the covenant so you won't go to hell? Okay, we have something in common, right? And we have a problem. In that, at least next to the words of Jesus to Peter and the way this story is, it doesn't make any sense that Jesus isn't reaching out his hand, even if your belief is being held together with threads. Or when your confession is filled with confusion. It's not about how Peter called. And Jesus didn't say, I need you to recite the Nicene Creed in Greek. It's none of that. Because the point isn't how Peter called, it's on whom did he call. Jesus is Jesus after all. He hesitated, Peter, sure he did. Who among us does not? But he focused his attention on Jesus. He knew who to call upon. While we waver, the promise is that Jesus does not. That's good news if I've ever heard it. We will struggle. We'll have all sorts of challenges in our life. Some of us will suit up and be ready at any given time to face that head on, and we'll claim our faith as the strength on which we pursue that fight. And some of us will have questions and doubts and fears that are understandable if anybody's paying attention. Sometimes the wind will be at our back. Sometimes it will be a headwind that we'll have to work through all night long. And sometimes it will violently come rushing down the valley and bring the waves across our bow. How you respond to that is never going to be determinant of whether or not Jesus offers you love. Amen. Jesus offers you love and grace and salvation. He was already walking on the water toward the boat when Peter got out. And he was there, ready to lift him up. Not because he asked at just the right time or said just the right words, but because he asked the one who is always there to lift us out of the water. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen.